In this video, we're going to explore painting Drow flesh tones. It's probably one of the darkest flesh tones in the series. This is Raging Heroes Blood Vestal. Got a little different hair color as well. So in this case, I actually did prime it white, because some of the colors that we'll use on the flesh tone, even though they're dark, they're pretty translucent, and that'll make the flesh tone a little more luminous also, even though it's dark. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the colors. Mixture of Reaper here with the Deep Twilight, and this is the Ashen Brown. This is Brown Rose from Vallejo. Back to Reaper with Maiden Flesh. A couple more Vallejos. This is an Ivory. I never use pure white. I always have some kind of off-white. Tend to go more towards the yellow also, which is what the Ivory is. Deep yellow, that's going to be, and the Rucksack Tan, it's going to be more for this armor. And the reason I'll focus in on the armor a little bit is because it's also a contrast to the flesh tone, not just in color as far as its hue, but also it provides a little lighter value. And then these are some of the hair colors here. This is Green Sky. It's kind of a nice color here. Some Verdigris. And then last we have a dark of Violet Shadow. It's what was used on the base, and we'll use some of that on the blades. Again, I might do a little bit on the blades because there'll be some reflections of the flesh tones on those blades. So that covers the paint, covers the miniatures. Next we'll talk about the brushes and the palette. I have the brushes arranged on the palette in 3 primary groups. First one that I'll talk about are these filbert brushes. They are kind of an all-purpose brush because you have the large flat surface. You've also got this kind of rounded, tapered shape, and also a chisel edge. So this lets you do an amazing amount with a relatively bigger brush. I think 2 is about the smallest size it's going to come in. This one's a 4. This one's a 6. It also comes in another brand of American Painter, which is kind of a relatively more inexpensive brush, but still it really will get the job done. And these are even less expensive here. These are craft brushes. These are number 8 rounds. And what's nice about these is that when they're relatively new, they have a pretty good point. Nice sharp point. But when they do get a little bit distressed, a little older, they get a little kind of abused on the end, these are great for painting your base, doing some of the wherever you need to kind of jam your brush in on the miniature. Why wreck a good new brush when you've got brushes that have kind of seen better days? And then the last group we have here are liner brushes. This is actually another American Painter liner brush. I prefer these to spotters because they hold more pigment, more water, and will kind of progress along the miniature without running out of paint. You don't have to do quite as many brush strokes. This one has been used a lot, and when a brush reaches this stage, just like with the craft brushes there, I like to use this for my glazing. Now I've got kind of a mid-range brush here. This is actually a Winsor Newton, but it's about halfway price-wise between the American Painter and the Winsor Newton. So basically I use all these other brushes to keep my kind of premier brush good for longer. So here's one of those craft brushes. You can see prices pretty nice on those, and you can see a nice tip. So again, kind of using all these other brushes to keep this one for your fine details. Last thing I'll talk about is this. This is a disposable palette. Here we've got it, paper palette, nice size. Got 40 sheets, and that means is cleanup when you're done consists of taking the sheet, ripping it off, throwing it in the garbage, which is really you can't get much easier than that for your cleanup. So we've talked about the paints, the palette, the brushes. We've got miniatures ready, so let's put some color out and let's get to painting. To make the miniature a little bit easier to paint, I've got it magnetized. See, I've got a piece of sheet metal here on the top of this empty paint jar. To keep it even more secure, I've added some blue tack. And the idea behind this is it means that I don't have to hold on to the base and risk damaging that. It also means that I can hold the miniature at any angle that I might need to be able to get the brush in. So we're about ready to go. Now with the flesh tone, we've got these three colors at play here. With the hair, we have this over here separated by this armor color. So I've arranged them out on the palette that way. So I'm going to take the filbert brush and I'm going to do what I call the shaded base coat. It's kind of a general term. It's covered in one of the videos. What I'm going to do is start off with some of the deep twilight, a little bit of that brown rose. And all I want to do is kind of set the tone for this right away. So I'm not going to just work on the flesh tone and leave everything else to do afterwards, or just work on the hair, or just work on the face, or just work on one element. I'm going to work on all of the elements simultaneously. And the reason I do that is that it gives me some context, because you can see by putting this on the white primer, it's going to look really dark. But even this, which is what we've got out on the miniature now, well, it's not as dark. Certainly not as dark as the violet shadow. So again, it's all relative, and that's why I try to not get too wrapped up in just one part of the miniature. And this is why I kind of call it the shaded base coat, because even though it's got some shading elements to it, still it's really just the opening layer. It's just a base coat. You can see introducing more and more. Of that brown rose, but only to a degree. And you can see I can even do a little bit of wet into wet blending, because I'm using the filbert brush. I'm working relatively fast, and you can see it's not a dry brush. There's still a healthy amount of pigment on there. And I'll even go into the water and make sure that the paint's flowing well. But I'll only go so far with this. for the time being. Gonna leave that be because I want to get some armor color out here. Again, just because look at how even that much tones down that white that's right next to the flesh tone. And it's going to help. It may seem a little confusing right now, a little kind of chaotic and out of control, but it's actually, the idea is to provide you with more control. So again, having the miniature on this little pedestal makes it easier for me to turn it around at crazy angles. And right here, where you've got some of the armor, like the shoulder thing, and on the hilt of the sword and the arms. The nice thing about this whole shaded base coat deal is that you don't have to worry. You don't have to follow in the lines perfectly. The head crust here also needs a little bit. It's get the, in these early stages, it's just get the miniature covered, put the colors that you'd like to see out there, and just create a bit of a context for it all. So I can even add a little bit of that yellow that I talked about. That's going to be a much different set here. Let's get some of the verdigris also. And not too much, just a little bit. It's just to throw out, okay, I know on that side I want this to be a little lighter. On the back, it's the same thing. Here. And then just leave it. Don't get too involved, because again, we're still technically trying to base coat this. And some quick work on the blades, some of the violet shadow and the verdigris together. Again, just get rid of more of this white to set a nice context for all these other colors. And it's about working relatively fast. See where I'm holding the brush? Sometimes I even hold it way down here. And what that does is that it keeps me from doing this, which is fine later on to get down this close when we're doing detail stuff. That's fine later, but that's not what we want to be doing right now. For the time being, this is just about kind of setting up some of these, some of your lights and darks. You can see what I kind of do is I create some of these little mini palettes within palettes. And what that does is I have this full range of color that I'm putting on the sword right here. So instead of just kind of dabbing away or mixing an all new color, I like to have these little swirls of color like this, because again it lets me see what I've been using all this time, and see just how light my latest color is compared to what I started with. And you can see all this while I've just used the filbert brush. It may take you a little while to get comfortable working this way. You don't have to. You could also use the number 8 round to apply this, and I will actually be shifting to the number 8 round relatively soon here. So last thing we have to do, kind of get rid of some of this white primer is the hair. And I'm going to go into the green sky, actually let it mix into the violet shadow. And this looks so dark here, but compared to everything else that's around it, it's one of the lightest colors that we've got, at least so far, on the miniature. So what I'm going to do is get some of the hair inside that head crest. Same thing over here. Got this hair that hangs down. So don't be shy at this stage to let some of the colors bleed together. That's okay, because there's much more work to be done. This is just essentially a base coat. So once we have all of that green down, I'm going to do a little bit of lightening on that. Down here on the ends. On the top here again. Going to reflect a little bit of that color onto the blades. And that's just about, it's about as much as what I want to do with the hair. Don't want it to get too light too fast. So there we go. Yeah, not a lot of time. We've got most of the miniature and its essential colors kind of set out for us. Now I'm going to throw a little bit more colors out on the palette, and we're going to do some more, a little more shaded base coat on the flesh here so the deep twilight comes back out. This is another item that I like to use. It's a glaze medium. This is from Vallejo, but it's also made by Reaper. And what I like to use this for is to kind of keep a color mixed out on the palette and on the miniature from drying too fast. What that'll do is it'll keep this wetter for longer. What I'm going to do now on our flesh is start to put some lighter colors down. So you can see that I've switched to the number 8 round brush to give me a little more targeted control. So I don't want to go too far with the brown rose. I don't want this to get too light too fast. So let's do a little bit on the face here. Getting a little bit lighter on the forehead, the cheekbones. I'm going to add a little bit of the maiden flesh from Reaper. actually allow this to blend together a little bit. You can see some of the face is starting to emerge. Working on the cheekbones, top part of the chest. Top of the legs. Shift over to the back. So you can see what we're trying to build up to. What I also want to include is a tiny touch of that green. You can see what I just introduced, some of that green. So this way the hair is not such an isolated color. It's not just only in one spot. It's also, you'll also find it in the flesh tone as well. When it's mixed with those other colors, it doesn't really seem green. It almost warms up that color, makes it more yellow than anything else. I want to be sure not to go all the way to a highlight color yet. All we're doing is just building here. So back to the face. To the nose. Cheekbone. Forehead. Another cheekbone. And at this point, I don't have to worry about showing every single finger on the hands. All I'm trying to do is just again kind of build up my lights and darks, my contrasts. Here I want to, on the blade, reflect some of the flesh tone. So I'm actually taking some of the lighter colors that I'm using on the flesh tone here. Now at a certain point, which we're starting to approach, I'm going to leave the flesh tone alone so I don't get too bright too quickly. And I'm going to shift to the armor. And I'm going to throw some of the yellow back out. And now I want to really go here because we wanted our dramatic lights on the armor to help make some of the flesh tone look even darker. I'm just kind of catching some of the top edges of the armor here. Again, this is all going to be toned down and lots of shadows added in our next stage where we do some glazing over this. So to the head crest again. And hopefully you can see. So what I'm doing, I'm just kind of dragging the brush over the top. It's picking up some of that edge. And just like with everything else, I'll only go a certain amount. and then stop. I want to pick up some of the this right here. It kind of goes up and over, underneath. Now, I normally work in a magnifier. This is about a 5 times magnifier. Really wasn't practical to use that here. It was just too hard to get the camera and the lights and everything all in the scene so you could see what was being done. At the stage, I'll even throw in where I might want the eye to go. It's just a little bit of an indication, that's all. There is also a little bit of a strap here. I just want to indicate for right now. So, just about done establishing where our lights and darks are going to be. I'm going to just throw a few more lights on the hair to get that kind of up to speed with everything else that we've done. And that completes your shaded base coat phase. What we'll do is get this nice and dried, and then we'll do some glazing over this. I have some glazing colors out on the palette. I have a set here from Secret Weapon. We've got some algae, some blue black, and some armor wash. I'm going to use a lot of these on the hair. Armor wash we'll use on some of these kind of bronzy, more brassy type look. And we've got Agrex, Earthshade we're also going to use in that area. Some of this nightshade on the hair, and also will be mixed together with this Dritri Violet for some of the darks on the flesh tone. So I've got the washes and glazes out on the palette. I know I throw that term around a lot. Essentially, a glaze is a very controlled wash. You know, a wash is lots of wash, medium in your brush, and you kind of slather it all over the miniature. This is a whole different thing. This is taking a small brush, like this liner brush, and using much more targeted, much more controlled, and just like I'm not trying to wipe out all of the light colors. So you'll even absorb some of it on a paper towel, and you can apply several layers of your wash. Same thing on this side. And this is just a little bit of that Agrex Earthshade being combined with the armor wash from Secret Weapon. So I'm just letting some of that color do some shading for me. You know, as I'm leaving the hair, I haven't done anything with the hair yet. going to go down to on the legs here, and the same thing. I'm just going to pull this down. You can always do more layers to make it darker. It's going to be much more work to try and make it lighter. And I can even pull some away with my finger if I want. Do the same thing on the other side here. So you apply it and draw it down. And you can remove some if you feel the need to do that. And you'll notice a trend that I try and constantly keep the miniature in motion, constantly moving around, not settling down to one area and just work on that to the exclusion of everything else. Now part of that is because this you're glazing it, that can splatter a little bit, and if you've got some completely finished section, then you should splatter some of your washes and glazes and onto that. That'll make you a little bit unhappy, I think. So I'm going to kind of stop with what I'm doing with the armor. And now I'm going to throw a little bit onto the blades here. I got some blue black, some of the nightshade. What I'm going to do, I don't want to turn this into a non-metallic exercise. But if this were metallic paint, you could still pretty much use these same washes and glazes over it. It would give you mostly the same effect. Again, as a watercolor artist, pastel artist, I didn't have metallic paints, so I learned to use something different. Now here, I want to have some of this reflect onto the blade, so I want to make sure some of that kind of deep twilight color, especially where the blade is closest to the ground. Flip this over, do it on the back. Working my way around, gonna do it a little bit there. So let's do our first glaze on the hair. So I've got some of the algae, still mixing in a little bit of the nightshade, and I'll start in with the hair. This is gonna, you can see it's starting to draw out. You can start to see the hair, get some nice shading to it without a lot of extra work. Draw it down, and I don't want to lose highlights. I can always wipe some away with my finger. But it's kind of important to think about. See over here, I don't want to forget this area. It's one way to help avoid any kind of watermarks or anything like that by having all around the hair and then drag it down. And I'm still going to do at least one more layer on this to darken it down. I'm going to keep drawing it down, letting gravity do a lot of the work. Every so often pulling some away if I feel like it's wiping out my highlights. Sometimes I even change the angle of the miniature so that gravity gets a boost. So you can see without doing any section of this to a finished degree, we're starting to get a whole lot of form here. And what I'll do is just in here a little bit more. But that really, I want to really let that settle down and dry. I want even more control over this next glaze. And it's even going to be watered down a little bit, so I'm mixing, you can see, some of the nightshade and the violet together. And the point of that is to do some of our darks on the flesh. So I'm going to start here on the side of the face, this side of the face, into the eye socket. You can see I use the brush. If it starts to pool too much in an area, I use the brush to pull it away. You can see now those white blobs that we put by the eyes, all of a sudden those, not so much white blobs anymore. Over the hands, down the arms. Here on the chest. Down near the stomach. Towards the waist. Making sure that it doesn't get too, I want this to be too purple. So I'm getting enough of that blue in, I might even throw in a tiny bit of the armor wash, especially as it gets down closer to where the armor is. So here too, on the other leg towards the top. Flip this around, work the rest of the thigh. Same thing here. This one may be a little more in shadow. To this hand. And sometimes these will kind of bleed together a little bit. I'm going to take some of the nightshade, mix that in with the armor wash, and get some even more on the ends of these, like where the boots are here, the shoes, to tone that down. Don't want to lose the lights though. So you can see I'm kind of my second round, my second layer of shading. And I've found that several layers of this kind of transparent shading go faster than really just one opaque layer. Because again, you're not getting too bogged down. So now you really starting to see more and more shape. Getting closer to some of the darks that we've got on the sample figure. You've got the crest here. It's going to need a few more rich darks. Now here, the idea is for the head crest to be a little darker so that the hair, the lighter hair behind it, well, looks lighter. Because we need the hair to look lighter, for the flesh tone to look darker. And you can do as much or as little as you want with your glazing. Again, to me, I'm very used to it. It's what I've always done. It's going to be a little more difficult maybe for some of you who are just kind of starting with this. That's okay. Just be patient with yourself. I'm going to go with even more of the nightshade in green. And even a little bit of the purple right here. Because that's, I want some of the color that's behind this hair. I don't want it to be a solid, opaque mass. I want some of that to bleed through. And I did a little bit of that here. Again, I want to make sure that there is enough dark, because we want a darker flesh tone, but I didn't want it to become just black. That's why it's got a little bit of this little more of a purple tone to it, but not super purple. And do another round on the face. Some of the lips are again. We're going to go back and work on the flesh. We're going to go back and work on all the different sections of this. We're just kind of setting up that value pattern that I keep talking about, and that is goes all the way from your lightest lights to your darkest darks, and it has to be injured, and that can't have all the lights just on the hair or just on a few highlights here. It has to work its way from top down. You have to think about which way the light is going to. So we've gotten to a point. I'm going to have to dry this off, assess where we're at, and then start to go back in with some of the middle tones and ultimately back into some highlights. So that's going to finish up our glazing stage. With the shaded base coat and the glazing and tinting stage complete, now we're set to go back into some of our middle tones and our lights. I'm going to concentrate on the flesh tone in this segment, which means I've got some of the Reaper paints back out here. Got the ash and brown. We've got some of the green sky. We're going to use these kind of together here. So I've got some of the ash and brown, a little of the maiden flesh, tiny bit of the green. And now what you want to do is start to work in some more highlights, more mid-tones. Some work in here on the forehead. Trying to eliminate some of the excess paint. So I'm going to change the angle of this. Work on the cheekbone. Try and draw out top of the mouth. Shift this over. Some of the arm. I want to make sure that I don't lose the hand. And this is the sort of flesh tone that, you know, maybe you go back and forth. You put down some lights, and then you think, okay, I want to shade this back darker a little bit. It's up to you. It's what you want. So I'm working back into some more parts of the face. Let's turn this over, make sure we don't get too involved in one area. And try and get some of that onto the legs, onto the arm, onto this hand. So you can see, while that's starting to look very light, what's on the palette is relatively dark. So I'm going to go back in. Make it slightly lighter. You can see I've done a little bit of shading underneath what the belly button is, and back to the face. Work this up a tiny bit later. And with each kind of progressive stage that I go lighter on this flesh tone, it start to see more and more the shape emerge. I've got this hand here, so I'm gonna make this so you can see it, but also get it to where I can get the brush at a decent angle. So still nothing at this point approaching a very bright highlight, and that's intentional. We want to keep it that way. You can see that upper lip now and the nose start to get a little bit more, but not too much. So again, just thinking light's coming down this way, so I'm going to hit the areas where that light would obviously reach. gonna throw a little more of the maiden flesh. I'm gonna try and rotate this around so that I can do some of the fingers here. See if I can make this so you can see on the other hand. Also thinking about the blade. So over here on the forehead, back to the cheekbones. The chin needs a little more. Even gonna throw a little bit onto the chin. Now for the eyes, I'm actually gonna reach into the verdigris here. I'm gonna lay this down. Try and get the brush at the right angle. I'm actually gonna kind of warm myself up by hitting some highlights there. Flip this over. Try and do the other eye. Now later on, I'm actually going to do a little bit of a sketch for you. Because these eyes are just so darn tiny, you won't really see necessarily everything that I'm going to do with the eye, some of the eyelids, and the pupils. I'm going to do a little bigger illustration of that so you can see. So we've got the eyes out there. I want to make sure I've got some, there we go, some of that dark. That's the violet shadow. I'm going to throw some deep twilight back out. And here, so I'm going to work somewhat transparently. And I go back onto some of what we put down. Because I want to work that, I want to make sure that it stays dark enough, because this is supposed to be about dark flesh tone after all. And underneath, I want to make sure on the underside, see of this one eye, I want to make sure there's enough dark there. So just want to do that a little bit. Gonna mix the verdigris in with the purple. Make sure you can see this. And I'm working on just that lip right there. Now I want to bring out some of that brown rose. I've kept it off the palette for the time being because that's kind of a rosy color there. And I didn't want to be tempted to reach into that too often. And I want to save some of that. I've been saving it for some of the face. Let's make sure I've got this at an angle you can see it. Gonna work on the chin and a few parts of the chest. Because I don't want it to get too cold too fast. It's not about ghostly flesh tone. It's supposed to be a darker flesh tone. We're kind of going back and forth a little bit there. It injected a little bit of extra life into the flesh tone. So hopefully I've got this where you can see it. Kind of highlighting the nose. Some on the cheekbones here. That goes down to the... Now sometimes the more dramatic your highlights in a more compressed space, maybe the flesh looks a little more, gives it more of a satiny look. It doesn't look quite so flat. Almost a little bit glossy. So here I go back to the lip there. Little dab on the chin. So again, what we're trying to do is, see how we've got some very dramatic lights. Here again, that's all about making, maybe giving it a little more of a gloss. I'm going to let some of that rose back in with the Maiden Flash. This is about as light as I'm going to want this to get. Few spots on face. Gonna go to the hands, maybe on the knuckles here. So put this at a good angle for you. And with my darker colors out here, I reinforce some of the fingers in case they've gotten too light. So hopefully this is at an angle for the camera that's good. So those fingers, a little spot here that needs some defining. And sometimes I will just take my regular paint and even use that as a bit of a wash. So what I want to do now, grab some of the twilight shadow. Got the Winsor Newton brush. And so I'm going to actually hold this upside down. To try and do my two irises on the eyes. So again, trying to make sure you can see what I'm about to do here. I know it's really, really tiny. This is why I want to do that kind of larger example later. I'm just putting in Trying to put in the 2. There we go. Gonna reinforce top of the lip there. I've got a pretty dark brow shadow there. What if I wanted to make it a little bit lighter? So I'm going to make some of the verdigris there. And I'm going to put just a little slightly different color right here. And again, this will I'll kind of illustrate this a little bit on a couple inch high piece of Sculpey, and you'll be able to see it a little bit better. You can see I kind of lightened up this area a little bit on either side. That's done, is just kind of restored a little bit of the shape to the face. I don't want it to be all just shadow. Now, perhaps at this point, I'm going to say that's enough with the flesh. So we've finished most of the flesh tones. We've done the eyes, worked on the face. Now it's time to do a little work on the hair. So I've got the verdigris and the green sky out there. I just put some flow improver out because these are some thicker paints here. See how kind of thick that is? The flow improver right away cuts down on that, and it's, in a way, it's a little better than using the water. It tends not to leave the water marks. So I'm going to make sure that the top of the head, some of these areas will get the most light. So speaking of the top of the head, I'm going to try and move this around so I can get I'm using the Winsor Newton brush now because I'm really trying to pull out these individual hairs. I don't want to get too light too fast. And I will also use my finger to take some away if I feel it's getting too light too fast. You can kind of see the advantage of the liner brush. I don't have to keep going back into the palette for paint all the time. There's enough here. It's letting me do a fair amount of work. So over here, I'm going to rotate it around the hair that's kind of flowing over the shoulder. Over here by that head crest. Want some shape over here. And the key is not to go too light too quickly. We may not even do a full highlight on the hair. But the lighter this hair is, the darker the flesh is going to seem. I'm going to turn this around, and I'm going to, this is kind of an important set of here, right here. Trying to ease my way into that. Got this here that curls around here. I'm just going to throw my highlight on the armor there because it is, I want it to be this color. So while I have it, while I'm in the area, I would just put that there. So we've got this section here. I'm going to try and make sure my thumb's not in the way. Now I've still got, see, I've still got a ways that I can go here by building up the light. So I'm going to get some more of the verdigris. Trying to keep my thumb out of the way. And that's about as light as that's going to go. And picking out individual hairs to highlight. You can see I haven't used any kind of white at all. At this stage, I've tried to use light colors that have some kind of a tint to them, whether that's more white, I'm sorry, more green, more yellow, more towards the pink. So I'm gonna, again, while I have this color right here, I want these highlights. Let's make sure my thumb's not getting in your way. I think I want some more activity in here. I'm going to go back to a somewhat darker color, but this part of the hair right by the face, want a little more there. Same here. Again, the darker that is, or the lighter that is, the darker the flesh is going to be. Again, trying to keep the flow of this hair moving while I have this color. Throw some on a few spots of the sword blades here. And I'm working here because, well, it's close to the hair. I want to make sure some of this finds its way onto the sword. Same thing for the armor. It's all about these kind of colors in the neighborhood. Now I could maybe one tiny step lighter. So I'm going to put the white out here. This is the ivory. So you can see it lets me go one little step further. So I'm going to try and shift this around so that I can get to the top of the head. And I'm going to grab some of that flow improver. Hopefully, again, thumb's not in the way. While I have this, I'm going to see if I can put a tiny bit of a highlight on the eye here. Tiny bit on the lip. One more section on the hair, and we're going to call the hair completed. See here on this front side. And we're just about ready to call it finished on the hair. I want to get this to flow a little more. And while I've got this out, I'm going to bring some of the yellow out too. We're going to do the armor next because again that's right next to the flesh tone, and that helps set the context for our dark flesh. So now we're going to work on some of the armor. Mostly in terms of highlights, but not exclusively. So before I start to mix white into the armor color, using a little bit of that green. And now I want to make the head crest lighter, because what that's going to do is, and especially see right here, you can see this part of the head crest that comes down right next to the face. If I can get a decent amount of light colors here, again that flesh color will darken down. So here on this side it's the same thing. Right along here. But to make sure it's not all just highlights, I reached into some of the ashen brown. And we still have a ways that we can go. So I can grab a much lighter color now. Let's make sure you can see it. And you can see the difference that makes. So we need to do the top of the head crest. I'm going to rotate the miniature around. Now I need to think about some of the other spots here. Don't want to forget those. Even the hilts on the swords. I'm going to go back to somewhat dark. I can even get a little bit of the twilight. And work back into some of the middle tones on the leggings here. Back to something that's a little bit lighter. Again, I don't want this to turn into a metallic demo here. You could still, even with metallic paints, mix in some of these colors if you want the same kind of color contrast between gold and the more violet colors. By bringing out some of these lighter bands, and it's gonna make the flesh tones seem darker. So along the top part of the arm, coming down from the shoulder. Now here on the chest, this is always a tricky thing because it's more just like a line, not really any kind of armor plate there. Need to have a little more, some of the later flesh tone in on this. So I'm not gonna get too involved with the armor. It's not about the armor. It's all about the flesh tone. So I'm going to take some of my lightest color here, and we'll put a few finished lights on the sword blades. So here on this top one, this is really going to catch the most light. And we do the same thing if we were using metallics. So And the principles are the same. It's about light and dark, and they also apply to metallics just like they do to non-metallics. So by creating some of this brighter contrast here, it really helps show off the darks. So let's look at where we're at now. Maybe I'm going to tone down some of this just a bit. Go back in with the tiny bit more light here. Using some of that brown rose one last time. Make sure that doesn't get too icy. I want to enforce one little set of lights on the cheekbones. And I'm going to do a tiny bit with the violet shadow. Oops. Right here. A little there, tiny bit there. So that is going to be just about it. Now I'm going to do that little sketch for you in this final segment. I'm going to do that little exercise that I mentioned. I'm going to take just a little sheet of Sculpey here and kind of show you in a larger format what we did on the eyes. What I'll try and do is construct the flesh tone that was around it. Here's some of our lighter colors, the nose. And I'm just going to build this up a little bit so that you can get a hint what was done with the eye. So again, you're going to have plenty of shadow here. And what we did is delineate the top eyelid here. But we also had to do some on the bottom. Now the bottom almost was laid out by default because we worked in with our light here on the cheekbone. Now with the eyes, where we had gone in with the verdigris, now this is something that I have to kind of put into this larger sketch, this shadow under the eyelid. This was kind of there by, remember when we took our little dot of light, put it there, and then did the little bit of a glaze over the top? That sort of did this little bit of shading for me. Remember, I held it upside down so that I could do this. So what I wanted to do was connect the top of the iris to the eyelid. I'm going to even get out some more dark colors here. So you can see, so we strengthened that top eyelash, the top of the eyelid. Now of course here, it's so huge, I can actually put the pupil inside the iris. Now if this, obviously, the eye were big enough, you would see a little bit of this, where we actually shade that. And you would also have a highlight there. I'm going to put some of the violet shadow back out again. And this was what we had done in this part of the eye, right here. Kind of creating a little bit of eye shadow there. Remember, we had kind of blended it out into the rest of the flesh tone. And once you've got that, then you can put in your things like the eyebrow. scan. This is just a little kind of an extra thing here. Give you more of a little better view of what it was we were trying to do with our eye. So here was some of the brighter colors on the cheek, the nose. So once again, this is just a quick little exercise. So there's kind of a close-up of our eye. Of course, this is a tiny bit bigger than what we did on our miniature, but the principle is the same.
is where